Exodus. By N. D. Wallace Swan. An appeal. It is current year +8. Thousands around the world have lost their faith in the existing and persisting order. The desire for stability has expired in all but spirit, but will remain lost in these conquered lands. Chaos is all which remains, with a choice of two forms. On the one hand there is the chaos of the encroaching anarcho-tyranny, while on the other the chaos of Exodus, the as yet unknown. Millions of incorrigible plebeians clap their miserably naive hands at the spectacles and ceremonies of bread and circus, appeasing their basal and banal desires. Their heavy-laden hearts lined with leaden spirit, like an automaton made flesh, execute their sequences in submission's abundance. For what is right, but not which is commanded by power? And what is wrong but to reject such current things? Such are mere simulacra of men. But it is not merely to reject for rejection's sake, but for the sake of values and immaterial belief. This noble sacrifice happens and exposes oneself to suffering regardless of the choice to remain or to leave. To stay means you will fight this ghastly circumstance for as long as you are able, with which you will bequeath your heirs. They ideally will continue your pained struggle. With each subsequent generation, your progeny will flip a coin, and we hope our legacy endures. Oblivion, the return to the Edenic bestial unconscious, looms large over these men of courage, ready for the return to paradise. In all likelihood, this chaos path is the death of man as a creature of God. His light extinguished will never again illuminate the earth. The alternative sacrifice is Exodus. One might extricate oneself from this permanent purgatory of imploding empire, and search out alternative locales to colonize. If this seems ridiculous, it isn't. You are already there if you are aware of the state of Western civilization. You're already considering it, even if you've chosen to stand and fight, so to speak. I agree that this is a noble endeavor, and I have nothing but admiration for the efforts, but it is overwhelming in its prosecution. You are the enemy of the order and power, and they make no reservation in how they will treat you. If you fight it, you will be devoured. If you resist it, you will be raped. If you submit to it, it will infect you, and if not you, then your progeny will someday fall to its talons. To assure yourself in this world of pause, there can be no half measures. It must be a complete and total victory, and this can only be accomplished through kinetic action. This enemy and you cannot coexist. One will inevitably destroy the other, and time is not on your side. This isn't meant to insult our abilities nor dissuade our allies from the fight, for even in a losing battle there exists great honor. But we mustn't deceive ourselves. The situation is dire. It's not that the enemy is at the gates of our fortress readying its attack. We are inside its fortress, protected more by its laxity and neglect, than by our talents and skills. With cunning and sharpness we may avoid its ire for some time. But not forever. It will test us and the mob on occasion to seek and destroy us, or our progeny. Sometimes it will accidentally eliminate some masses in seeking us out, but we too will on occasion be caught and destroyed. Hiding in plain sight becomes our camouflage, our mode de vie. Such continues until the proverbial crown is seized, which may be never. Generations will come and go, hanging on to our threads of hope, the once freshly loomed tapestry, becoming ever more threadbare, until it can no longer be held in the mind. Thus, hiding in plain sight, it becomes indistinguishable from the mob, and if it does not flourish elsewhere, although the philosophy might later re-emerge somewhere else entirely, your philosophical insights will be gone. I thus argue that an exodus of sorts is paramount to the continuation and flourishing of the philosophy of truth and justice. There are a number of ideas as to how or where this should be carried out. Resources and talents of all kinds will be required, and we possess them. But raw talent is not alone proficient. There needs to be something spiritually uniting the community. I do not know what this needs to be, though I can imagine a clergy of sorts which would administer this, and if possible, also administer the education of our youth, at least beyond the familial home and meet whichever standards are legally required in whichever host nation we build this community. Furthermore, it would counsel our people in life and hold the community together with strength and purpose. It would likely be difficult at first for those of us, myself included, inexperienced, or had this taken from us without our understanding, but it will assist and strengthen the youth and thus the future of our community and the continuation of our pursuits. Whether or not one might believe it, it must be exercised in faith, blindly, as had been traditionally done. As for which form it takes, it needs to be decided, and that is all. Outside of that, all who choose an alternative should form a separate community with which can be maintained mutually cordial relations. I do not recommend that any of the communities have fewer than 150 members, and if that number cannot be reached the project should be abandoned. The argument in regards to this division of friends, is that it could weaken us. But a deeper analysis reveals that it would increase system stability to separate fundamental beliefs, rather than force association. Over time this would devolve into partisan politics with each side trying to gain advantage over the other, a wholly unproductive exercise. By creating fundamental monocultures, association with different tribes becomes voluntary. The hope is each community is able to function maximally, and this would result in a higher degree of ideas independence, avoiding the encroachment of state intervention between incommunicable groups. Location, location, location. We must ask where this could take place, and consider what is needed. Ideally, the location will be largely free from interstate conflict so we are neither drawn into a war, nor subjected to its horrors. In either case, this should be minimized. Next, it would have to be in an area with basic resources like water and land for food production. We should also have a reason to be welcomed into this host nation, which biases towards unoccupied boundary areas. Preferably, the weather should also be taken into account. Also, it is tactically beneficial to have some higher order infrastructures within a few hours' drive for issues we cannot handle at first, such as surgical hospitals. Much must be considered. We can begin by ruling out totally out of the question locations. For example, most Western European nations, Canada, USA, and most of Southeast Asia. The cheaper, the better as well. The top candidates seem to be Eastern Siberia, Polynesia, or South America along the Brazilian, Argentinian, and Uruguayan border, near or along the Uruguay River, around but not limited to the small town of Barra do Quaraí. This is just to aid in looking at the map if you are curious. Eastern Siberia would have plenty of affordable land, essentially unlimited raw resources, and is quite isolated. However, it is also potentially weak to Chinese influence and exists as the logical Chinese Lebensraum. There is also the issue of the conflict between the West and Russia, which might leave our people subject to poor treatment by the host nation. Also, we could be treated as open traitors by our former nations, making revisiting questionable. If general conscription occurs, we may be forced to fight in conflicts we have no interest in. The locals are usually very friendly, though there are likely some post-Soviet horrors one would have no choice but to witness. Polynesia would have fewer resources, but the climate is far superior. Locals could make for cheap labor, and they are very friendly to temporary residents, but not necessarily to permanent newcomers, as they are quite territorial. There are, however, a great diversity of locations to choose from. Most islands are small, and rarely come up on the international political scene. Obviously, there is easy and near universal access to the sea. Fish are caught easily, and farming fish is a possibility. Depending on the particular island, there are many international shipping routes moving through Polynesia. Many of these islands have dwindling populations as residents seek Western opportunities. Pitcairn Island will be mostly abandoned in a few decades. The South American option, like the Polynesian, will have a great climate and few if any conflicts with the West. There are plentiful resources in comparison, and highly developed metropoli within a few hours' drive from nearly anywhere, giving access to higher-level infrastructures that may be needed. The locals are highly welcoming of newcomers, often preferring them to other locals. There is a slowly decreasing birth rate, which would offer more opportunities for our own families. These three nations have a long history of hosting political dissidents, and pluralism is a well-established norm. The general population is made up largely of European lineages, especially in this southern Brazilian area. Many European traditions, brought there long ago, are practiced openly today exactly as they were some 5 centuries before colonization. Although each of these areas represent a frontier zone with the potential for prosperity, I believe the South American option is the candidate which would be the most successful. The political apparatus there is entirely consumed by its own localized problems, and should we wish to be left alone, we will be. If at some point the state turns to interfere with us, corruption will be our friend, and we can grease the necessary gears and sprockets to pass through tight socio-political spaces, which would be unavailable elsewhere. Throughout Brazil even today, entire communities speak German, Italian, Ukrainian, Russian, and Japanese. After the American Civil War, 20,000 Confederates settled in a place they named Americana, in the state of São Paulo. In the end, roughly half of them returned to the USA, but the ones which remained played a significant role in the development of that area, and still perform Dixie-related ceremonies each year in the town square. The Brazilians take pride in it. Compare that with the West, and it is quite the contrast. Development. With time, as a community, we will work to take over enforcement positions and those of local political power, by putting our own people in charge. It doesn't matter if forces of the state are present, only that our friends and kin control them. This in turn brings a number of advantages for our progeny by existing in the marches of these nations. Given the proximity to these borders, it is only a quick hop to another of the countries. If we organize, this creates an opportunity for access monopolization and the benefits that would bring to our group. By holding the levers, we can enforce disadvantageous state policy upon others, while selectively choosing not to do so for our friends. As an organized minority, we will have a strong foothold as a result, and can turn the yoke of the state in on itself. This would have to be below the waterline to avoid the ire of the host nation, but wouldn't require much organizing outside of typical nepotism and bribes of favored locals. We could hide our entire scheme in plain sight, as we will have our own language, culture, and methods, separate from outsiders. The fear is always that we will be absorbed, but through encouragement of intra-tribe marriage incentives like dowry and expanded familial networks, this becomes less likely as life will be easier than rolling the dice even with friendly locals. The nature of the family will need to be fully restored to a point before liberalism, or those same poisons will destroy us too. Finding a way out of the fiat-based inflationary currency system would also be a great way to maintain independence and wealth. Using our own currency would help us avoid the taxman for our intra-tribal exchange. Cryptocurrency is an option, as is hard currency, metals. If we can create a market for our own goods in the outside world, we could offer discounts to outsiders who pay us in our currency, which would make it difficult for the taxman to trace and tax us, while creating demand for our own money, which should also be slowly deflationary. It would then be both possible and stable for us to import outside goods. If done dutifully, our standard of living will eventually be much higher than that of the host nation. This success will be our own. Any outsider who would claim credit for our success is a liar. Ideally, we will do the work ourselves, and if we hire local labor, we should ideally pay them above the normal wages so they cannot later claim we took advantage of them, a common, resentment-based complaint. Another option would be to buy an existing village or small town and work from there to take advantage of its existing infrastructure. This would be the fastest way to start and is not much more expensive than starting from scratch. If a town is too large, buying up one of the neighborhoods and building a sort of wall around it is a good option, and over time we could raise our own into the local elite positions. Defensive measures will be paramount regardless of choice of location. But how would this be accomplished sustainably? Order. I must preface by saying all of this is speculative, open to criticism, and is meant to just get us thinking about this topic and generate better ideas. Perhaps it is just an exercise to reflect upon our current paradigm? But we must consider the structure of power for long-term stability. History demonstrates that the longest-lived systems had a feudal character, or what H. Hoppe refers to as private government. Even Republican city-states like Venice, Florence, and Milan were run by an oligarchy controlled by merchant families. Both forms survive to this day, though depleted by the globo homo insistence of democracy. Under a city-state oligarchy, it takes a complex arrangement of interconnectivity, loyalty, and organization to maintain a delicate system balance. Under a feudal barony, there is one node of power in the baron, though he would require a council of ministers including a religious leader, the head of the local church, holding significant power that the baron would have to respect. This is unrelated to the false and failed idea of the separation of powers. Instead, it is related to the division of labor. There is always the option of theocracy. However, this sort of government tends to delay the development of infrastructure, as the focus moves too far away from the material world, resulting in destruction of our progeny, either by their rejection of such systems, or physical provision due to over-focusing on immateriality. I believe that history shows the requirement of both, at minimum material and ecclesiastical elements. The priest of the barony would be wholly focused on his position, but he should also maintain a family. There are reasons for this, the first being a need to build up a society, that he might have a son to inherit his position. This may not be allowed under some religious sects. Another goal should be to create an order that would make up a monastery of sorts, where young men can push themselves to higher principles. Monks would be a mixture of warrior and priest, and from them a large number of our future leaders will be selected. This is an era of dedication and renewal, and for many generations this will be the case until our society can support at least a small cohort of fully dedicated warrior monks. Erudite and martial, trained in both of the matters of war and spirit. All will be encouraged to marry, but this is optional. In conclusion, this subject matter could be written about endlessly, but ultimately it is about what must be done for the persistence of Faustian man. We are cursed to always seek out endless space, or come to a reckoning with our demise. The growing technocracy threatens man with the Magian curse of timelessness. Our Faustian nature compels us to push on. Whether that means our earthly home is slated for abandonment, I do not know. All I know is I have the will to press on no matter the conditions to which I am subjected, for glory lay in my temple of struggle and I will pay its tithe.